In the village of Olowo, where the roofs were made of rust-colored zinc and the mornings began with the cry of roosters and the smell of wet earth, there stood a tree no one spoke of lightly. It was called Olowo, the tree of secrets. The elders said it was planted by spirits, that it grew where a powerful man once fell from pride. No one knew how old it was. Its bark was so thick it looked like wrinkled elephant skin, and its roots stretched like sleeping pythons beneath the ground. The tree stood on the outskirts of the village, near the place where the red soil turned dark and damp, where children were warned not to play. A carved wooden sign hung near it, faded with rain and sun. It read, "Speak not under this tree after sunset. It listens." People obeyed, not because they feared the tree exactly, but because stories wrapped around it like vines. Stories of men who disappeared. Stories of voices heard beneath its branches even when no one was there. Stories of prideful people who mocked the tree, only to vanish like smoke. Everyone obeyed, except one man. His name was Tunde. Tunde was a man of wealth. His compound had 3 buildings, all painted in bright colors with tall gates. His goats were fat. His wives were many. His voice, louder than a town crier's drum. He had come to Olowo from the city, wearing polished shoes and carrying briefcases. He bought land, built a house, and started a cocoa trade that made him rich within 2 years. People respected him, but no one loved him. Tunde was generous with coins, but stingy with humility. He mocked the villagers' customs. "Look at these people," he would laugh, reclining under his veranda, sipping palm wine, still scared of a tree like it's 1700. If it were in the city, they would have turned it into a car park. Mama Beezy, the village storyteller, once tried to warn him. She shuffled to his gate one morning, leaning on her walking stick. "Omo me," she said. "Olowo is older than your coins. That tree has memory. It knows pride." Tunde laughed in her face. "Then it must love me, Mama Beezy. I'm full of it." She shook her head. "The tree may not speak, but it listens." He waved her away. Then came the day of the yam festival, when the villagers gathered to thank the gods for harvest. Drums echoed. Dancers wore white wrappers and red beads. Smoke from roasted corn rose into the evening sky. Tunde arrived late, as usual, wearing gold-rimmed sunglasses and a white agbada so clean it seemed to glow. His wives walked behind him like ornaments, fanning him gently. Instead of sitting with the elders, he stood near the edge of the village, beneath Olowo. Mama Beezy saw him and her heart dropped. "Not there," she whispered to no one in particular. Tunde clapped loudly, calling attention to himself. "My people," he boomed. "Let me tell you how real wealth is built. Not with drums and stories, but with smart men like me." The villagers fell silent. The wind paused. Even the leaves of Olowo stopped moving. A young boy tugged his father's sleeve. "Papa, should he be speaking there? It is after sunset." The father only said, "Let us pray the tree is merciful." But Tunde laughed louder. "Let the tree come and swallow me if it dares." Then the earth groaned. It started as a murmur, a low, rumbling sound beneath Tunde's feet. The roots of Olowo began to shift, cracking the ground like dry clay. The grass curled. The air thickened. The very tree he mocked now moved, not in wind, but in purpose. Tunde turned, confused. His wives screamed. The crowd backed away as the ground beneath Tunde opened like a giant yawn. A hole formed, not jagged, not messy. It was smooth, clean, as though the earth itself had prepared a seat. Before Tunde could run, vines shot from the roots like whips. One wrapped around his ankle. Another gripped his waist. He shouted. But the tree said nothing. It only pulled him into the hole. His last word was not a plea. It was a scoff. Then the hole closed, and the wind returned. The villagers stood frozen for several heartbeats. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Mama Beezy, tears in her eyes, whispered, "The tree has spoken." For the next few days, Olowo became quiet. The drums were silenced. The market slowed. People gathered in small groups to whisper what they saw. Some said they had heard a voice in the wind, Tunde's voice, calling out for help. Others said his riches were cursed now, that his compound should be abandoned. One woman claimed her baby stopped crying the moment the tree swallowed him, as though balance had been restored. But one man could not rest. His name was Fola. Fola was Tunde's younger brother. He lived simply, in a mud house with thatched roofing near the stream. He sold carved spoons and stools in the village market and spoke only when needed. Where Tunde chased praise, Fola listened. Where Tunde wore gold, Fola wore honesty. He had warned Tunde many times, had begged him not to mock the elders, had tried to tell him the stories mattered. But it hadn't been enough. Now, as he stood before Irako Oro, he whispered, "I don't know if you can hear me, but please, let me go after him." The tree said nothing, but Fola's heart stirred, like something ancient had opened a crack. He turned and walked to Baba Leke, the oldest living elder in Olowo, blind in one eye but sharp in mind. He found him sitting in his courtyard, carving a flute from bamboo. "I want to go into the tree," Fola said. Baba Leke did not laugh. He only asked, "Are you ready to bow where your brother stood tall?" Fola nodded. The old man stood, shuffled into his hut, and returned with a small gourd filled with clear water. He also handed Fola a strip of white cloth and said, "You must kneel. Pour this at the root. Speak this proverb, 'The head that bows sees the path.' Only then will the tree open." Fola accepted the items and bowed. As he turned to leave, Baba Leke added softly, "Inside the tree, you will not face Tunde's pride. You will face your own." That night, as the stars lit the village and the moon floated like a quiet eye in the sky, Fola sat alone, holding the gourd. He thought of the times he had envied his brother's success, of the moment he wished the tree would teach him a lesson, of the silence that followed. He whispered to the wind, "If he is to be judged, let it be fair, but let him not be lost." The wind didn't reply, but somewhere, deep in the roots of Irako Oro, something listened, and waited. The next morning, the village stirred quietly. Women swept the red clay courtyards. Boys fetched water in yellow jerry cans. Smoke from morning fires rose like prayers. But even as normal life resumed, a strange stillness hovered, like the village was holding its breath. Fola did not go to the market that day. He wore a simple white wrapper, tied tightly around his waist, and slung the sacred gourd across his shoulder using a palm rope. He had not spoken to anyone, not even Mama Beezy, who watched him from her bench, eyes narrowed in prayer. He walked barefoot toward the edge of the village, past the last compound, past the yam barns, past the 3 stones where ancestors were once called by name. And then he stood again before Irako Oro. The tree was motionless, silent, but it watched. He could feel it, like the ground itself had eyes. Fola knelt. He placed the white cloth flat at the base of the tree's trunk and set the gourd beside it. He took one deep breath, then uncorked the gourd and poured the water slowly onto the roots. The soil drank it in. Then he lowered his forehead to the earth and whispered, "The head that bows sees the path." For a moment, nothing, just the distant sound of palm fronds rustling. But then, the bark creaked, the roots shifted. A line appeared in the middle of the tree, glowing faintly with a soft green light. The line split, widened, breathed, and then, slowly, a door opened. Not one carved with tools, but one grown from within. A deep, cool wind blew from its center. It carried no scent, but it whispered like voices from a place older than time. Fola stood, heart pounding. He stepped forward, one foot inside, then the other, and the door closed behind him. Inside the tree, it was not darkness. It was something else entirely. Light pulsed like fireflies trapped in water. The air shimmered with gold and blue, like the night sky turned upside down. He was no longer standing on soil but on something soft, like moss but warmer. Trees grew here, tall and silent, their trunks made of silver bark and leaves that hummed gently as if alive. Birds with translucent wings fluttered overhead but made no sound. And the space felt endless, though it was inside the body of a tree. Fola took a few cautious steps. His feet made no sound. There were no paths, only echoes. Then he heard it. Fola. It wasn't spoken. It was felt, like the tree itself had thought his name aloud. He turned, and saw the shadows. They weren't ghosts. Not quite. They were figures. Some men, some women, wandering slowly between the glowing trees. Their faces were blurred, but each of them repeated one action over and over again. One man counted gold with shaking hands, again and again, even as the coins crumbled into dust. One woman stared into a mirror, admiring herself endlessly, while her reflection turned its back on her. One young boy picked fruits greedily, dropping them into an overflowing sack that tore open with each step. Each was stuck in their worst moment, replaying it like a broken song. These were not punishments. They were reminders. Then Fola saw him. Tunde. He sat at the base of a glowing tree, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as if listening to something only he could hear. His fine agbada was gone. Now he wore a simple cloth and his feet were bare. In his hands he held nothing, but he kept moving them, as if trying to cover his ears and eyes at the same time. Tunde, Fola whispered. His brother didn't answer. Fola stepped closer. Tunde, it's me. Tunde looked up. There was no anger in his eyes, only confusion and fear. Why did you come? He asked, voice dry. To bring you home. Tunde shook his head. I don't know the way. Everything here repeats. My thoughts speak to me. My actions echo. I hear myself when I was cruel, when I was blind. I see the people I hurt, even if they're not really here. Fola knelt beside him. I'm not here to judge you, he said. I'm here to remember who you were before the shouting started. Tunde looked away. I forgot that person. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the forest. Not from a mouth, but from the space itself. Only the bowed may leave. It was the same voice Fola had heard at the tree's opening. Deep, calm, ancient. Tunde swallowed. I can't bow, Fola. Not after everything. I feel small, like a broken calabash. What's the use? Fola reached into his cloth and removed a small carved wooden bead. It had belonged to their mother. She used to say, Fola whispered, even a broken pot can hold rain, if it chooses to. He placed the bead in Tunde's hand. Bow with me, Fola said. They both knelt, side by side, not to the forest, but to their own reflection. Tunde lowered his head until his forehead touched the moss. Fola did the same. There was no thunder, no flash of light, just peace. Then, a single tree ahead of them bloomed. Suddenly, silently, his bark peeled open like petals. Inside was not fire or judgment or test. It was a door of return, the way out. As they stood again, Tunde held Fola's hand for the first time in years. I remember now, he whispered. The day I left, you said you were proud of me. I still am, Fola said. Just not for the same reasons. Together, they stepped through the open tree. The light swallowed them, and Olowo waited. Back in the village, the wind shifted. Mama Beezy, sitting beneath her cooking shed, suddenly stood and turned toward the forest. The goats bleated. A baby stopped crying. Then the earth groaned, and from the roots of Olowo, two men emerged. One bare and bowed, the other quiet and carrying a single bead. The crowd that gathered did not cheer. They simply made way, as the brothers walked, one behind the other, into the village square. Tunde stopped before Mama Beezy. He knelt. I mocked what I did not understand, he said. And I was swallowed. She touched his head gently. You returned. So your mouth is now wiser than your feet. He stood, and smiled not with pride, but with peace. That night, the drums returned. Not loud, but steady. And under the stars, Tunde whispered to the Irako tree one last time. Thank you for eating me. The forest inside Olowo was not just a place. It was a memory, a spirit, a mirror. As Fola and Tunde walked deeper through the glowing wood, the light shifted with each step, as though reacting to their thoughts. Every tree seemed to hum softly. The leaves whispered not in language, but in emotion. They pulsed with echoes of long-held pain, joy, and regret. I feel watched, Tunde said, glancing at a tree that glowed faintly purple. You are, Fola replied, but not by eyes, by your deeds. They came to a clearing. In the center stood a wide, shimmering pond, so still it looked like a mirror carved into the ground. Around it, carved stones formed a perfect circle, each etched with a single word. Pride, envy, cruelty, greed, silence, fear. Above the pond, something floated. Not a bird, not smoke. Something shapeless yet heavy. And in its surface, Tunde saw himself, but not as he was now. This version of Tunde wore his finest clothes. He walked through the village, chest high, voice loud. He dismissed the carpenter who asked for fair pay. He mocked the market woman who couldn't read. He rolled his eyes when his wife cried. He ignored Fola's letter from the village. Tunde looked away, but the image followed. Why must I see this? He asked. Fola didn't answer. The tree did. To forget is to rot. To see is to grow. The words rippled through the pond. A second image emerged. This time Fola. He was younger, kneeling in a broken hut, holding a spoon with a cracked handle. One he had carved for his mother, who had just passed. He wept quietly, but Tunde's letter from the city lay unopened beside him. "I sent that," Tunde whispered, recognizing the folded edge. "I wrote, 'When you're ready, visit. There's work here.'" "I never replied," Fola said softly. "I thought. Maybe you didn't mean it." The pond darkened. "Why show this?" Tunde asked again. This time Fola answered, "Because this place is not for punishment. It's for remembering, so we can choose differently." They sat beside the water in silence. Suddenly, a soft bell rang. Not from a hand, but from the trees themselves. Leaves rustled, falling in spirals. One leaf landed in the pond, and a ripple spread. Then a path appeared. Not physical, but woven into the light. A direction. "Where does it lead?" Tunde asked. Fola stood. "To what you must do." The labyrinth of names. The path led them to a towering arch made of braided vines and polished stone. Above it glowed the word, "Eri," testimony. Fola read it aloud. The moment they stepped through, the forest changed. Gone were the trees. Now they stood in a village that wasn't a village. Everything was made of memory. Shadows of people walked around, villagers they once knew, some long gone. But their faces were still, like wax figures animated by breath alone. The voice of the forest boomed again. "You must return what you took, even if it was not gold." They stopped at a small hut where an old woman sat on a stool, her face lined like dried riverbeds. It was Mama Saad, a palm oil seller who had once pleaded with Tunde to help fix her leaking roof. He had laughed and offered her half the cost. "I gave her less," Tunde said now, "and when the rain came, her goods spoiled." He stepped forward, knelt, and said, "I return the price I never paid." The woman smiled, faded into mist, and a golden thread appeared, curling around Tunde's wrist. "That's one," Fola whispered. "More to go." They continued. Next, a little boy holding a broken pencil. "Emeka," Tunde murmured. "His father worked for me. I scolded him for being dirty." He stepped forward. "I return the dignity I stripped away." Another thread appeared, this time silver, wrapping around the first. Each encounter drew deeper into his past. At each stop, he returned a thing unseen. A voice he silenced. A chance he denied. A laugh he stole. A fear he caused. By the seventh thread, his arms shimmered like fabric woven by stars. But at the eighth shadow he froze. It was Fola. "You were always kinder," Tunde said. "But I never listened." Fola looked away. "You don't owe me that," he said. "I do," Tunde replied. "For every letter unread. For every smile I stole. Every time I let my pride walk ahead of my blood." He knelt before his brother. "I return the love I buried beneath ego." The threads glowed brightly, then vanished. The arch behind them closed, and the forest sighed, as though something old had finally been set down. The tree speaks. They walked once more beneath the glowing canopy. Ahead stood a throne, not royal, not rich, just a smooth, flat stone, surrounded by 7 white doves. The birds did not fly. They waited. Above the throne hovered a circle of light, within which spun a seed. Fola touched his chest. "I think this is your last test." Tunde nodded. He stepped forward, removed his wrapper, and stood bare-chested before the throne. The birds bowed. The forest fell silent. The seed descended slowly, landing in his open palm. It was warm, alive. Then a voice, not ancient this time, but familiar, filled the air. It was his mother's. "A man becomes a tree when his roots face the sun." Tunde placed the seed to the ground. A soft glow spread outward, and then, the same bark from Olowo curled upward around them. The forest began to fade. Light wrapped them gently, and the voice whispered once more, "Now return." The second birth. When Fola and Tunde stepped out of the tree, it was neither morning nor night. It was between. Twilight, the time when shadows and sun hold hands. A small crowd had gathered but kept their distance. Mama Bizi stood beside Baba Leke. "He passed," the old woman said. "He did not fight the roots." Tunde walked barefoot to the center of the village square. No agbada, no sunglasses, only a simple smile and soft eyes. "I went in a man," he said quietly. "I came out soil." He raised his hand and opened his fist. Inside, the same seed. He handed it to Baba Leke. "Plant this. Let it grow beside Olowo." The old man nodded. No tree should stand alone. That night, under a sky full of stars, Fola and Tunde sat outside, watching the fireflies. No words passed between them. None were needed. The roots had spoken, and both had listened. The days after Tunde's return were unlike anything the village of Olowo had ever known. No rain fell for 3 days, not a drop. The skies remained clear, cloudless, as if even the heavens paused to watch. And when the rain did come, it came gently, a slow, steady patter, as though the sky itself had been humbled. It was not the same Tunde who returned from the tree. His shoulders were still broad, his skin still dark and smooth, but there was something missing, or perhaps something added. An invisible weight had been lifted from his back and placed in his chest. He walked slower now. He listened more. His eyes searched for things beyond faces. Regret, pain, grace. He no longer lived in his 3-room mansion. Instead, he gave it to the village to be used as a school. He moved into a modest hut at the edge of Olowo, next to Fola's workshop. No wives returned, not out of punishment, but by mutual choice. Each had seen enough of the old Tunde to need distance from the new one, and he understood. The first gesture. On the 5th day, Tunde walked into the market square barefoot. He carried with him a clay pot balanced carefully on his head and a folded mat under one arm. He spread the mat beside the old well and sat down. Then, with a calm voice, he said, "If you are thirsty, come. I will pour." People gathered. Cautiously. Was this another trick? A performance? But the pot was filled with cold water, and Tunde poured it for everyone. Children, elders, even strangers. He never looked up while serving. His hands moved like water themselves. Slow, sure, steady. Mama Beezy came last. She took her cup, looked him in the eye, and whispered, "I see you." Tunde bowed deeply, forehead brushing the edge of his mat. The village exhaled. Whispers and wounds. Still, not all were ready to forgive. There were whispers. "He only does this to be praised again. Let's not forget how he treated Kemi's son. Did the tree truly change him, or just scare him?" The hardest voice came from Depo, the orphan boy whose father once worked for Tunde and died in debt. He approached Tunde one morning as he swept the schoolyard. "You used to pass by me like I was a rock," Depo said, arms crossed. "Now you want to teach me how to read?" Tunde lowered the broom and nodded. "Only if you want to learn." Depo spat to the side and walked away. Tunde picked up the broom again. He never mentioned it again. But every morning he swept. And every afternoon the classroom door stayed open. 3 weeks later Depo entered, sat in the back, said nothing, but stayed. The festival returns. The village decided to hold a second Yam festival, not as a tradition, but as a celebration of balance restored. There were debates. Some feared it was too soon. Others said the last festival ended with a man being swallowed. But Baba Leke spoke plainly. "If we only dance when nothing shakes us, we'll never move our feet." Preparations began. Drums were rewrapped. Palm wine brewed. Young girls practiced dances under the mango trees. Old men rehearsed praise songs for the gods and ancestors. This time, however, the festival grounds were moved, away from the sacred tree. Not out of fear, but out of respect. The day of the festival. Tunde did not dress in white this time. He wore a simple brown tunic and sat among the woodcarvers, helping peel yams and pass calabashes. When asked to speak, he declined. Instead, he stood quietly near the back, hands behind his back, smiling faintly as children danced and elders clapped. When the drummers played the old rhythms, Fola pulled him into the circle. At first, he hesitated, but then he moved, not with flair, but with truth. He danced not like a man showing skill, but like a man honoring time. Each step careful, each clap soft. At the end, the drummers fell silent, and the crowd, without cue, bowed their heads for a brief moment. Not to Tunde, to the lesson. The seed grows. Near the Irako Oro, a small fenced area had been cleared. In it, the seed Tunde had brought from the tree was planted. At first, it seemed nothing would grow. A week passed, then 2. Then, one morning, a small green shoot broke through the soil. Its leaves shimmered, not bright, but strange, as if they drank not just water but memory. Children called it the listening tree. It grew fast. By the 2nd month, it was taller than a yam stake. By the 3rd, birds began to nest in it. And by the 6th, no one passed by without bowing slightly. Just slightly, the gift to the tree. Tunde had one final act left. One evening, under fading orange skies, he returned to Irako Oro alone. He wore white, not out of ceremony, but out of clarity. He carried a bundle wrapped in cloth. As he stood beneath the great branches, he knelt and unwrapped the bundle. It was a carving of himself. Not proud, not perfect. A man bent in humility, eyes lowered, hands empty. He placed it at the base of the tree. Then he bowed deeply and whispered, "I cannot undo, but I can become." The wind picked up, the leaves shook, and somewhere, not far away, the birds began to sing again. Olowo, 1 year later. The village changed. Not quickly, not dramatically, but deeply. Children were taught to listen before they speak. Elders told stories with new weight. Fola's carving workshop became a learning center for both art and wisdom. And Tunde? He became a part of the village, not apart from it. People brought him problems, not because he had power, but because he had learned how to hold silence. He was no longer called the rich man. He was now known simply as Tunde the Bowed, and he wore the name with peace, the return of rain. One morning, as the sun was just waking the hills, a new mother came running to the square. Her child, born the night before, had been given a name. "His name," she said, holding the baby up, "is Oro, for he will speak only truth." The people clapped and ululated. Tunde, sitting beneath the listening tree, smiled and closed his eyes. And as he did, it began to rain. Soft, gentle, blessing. Years passed. The village of Olowo changed, but not into something new. Rather, it became more of what it always was, like the polishing of a calabash until its design finally shone through. Children no longer feared Irako Oro, they respected it. Each child was taught to bow slightly when passing beneath its branches, not in worship, but in gratitude. Not for what the tree took, but for what it gave back. And beside it, taller now than a man, stood the listening tree, the one planted from the seed Tunde carried out of the forest inside the Irako. Its leaves shimmered with a strange quietness, as though it could hear every story in the wind. Every month, the elders and children gathered beneath its shade. They told tales, they confessed, they forgave, and every story ended with the same 3 words: "I have learned." The old drum calls again. One Harmattan morning, when the wind carried dust from distant lands and the air smelled of pepper stew and charcoal, a group of strangers arrived in Olowo. They were scholars, writers. Some came from Ibadan, others from Accra, one from as far as Nairobi. They had heard the tale, through whispers, blogs, dusty books, and oral retellings, and they came to see if it was true. Was there really a man who had been eaten by a tree and returned? They found the listening tree first, then the shrine beneath Irako Oro, and finally they found Tunde, older now, gray in beard but not in spirit, seated on a carved stool, sanding a wooden flute with his hands. The oldest of the visitors asked, "Are you the man from the story?" Tunde smiled. "Which version?" "The one who was proud, and then bowed." He nodded gently. "I was both. Still am." The woman sat beside him. "Tell it to us." He looked up at the sky, the branches swaying above. Then he said, "I don't tell the story anymore. I lived it. But if you want to hear it, go sit beneath that tree." He pointed to the listening tree. The scholars walked slowly toward it, sat in silence and waited. A soft breeze passed. A single leaf fell, and one of them began to weep, not from sorrow, but from something deeper, recognition, the boy who would not bow. One day, during the dry season, a young boy named Cole stood beneath Irako Oro with his arms crossed. He was angry, at his father, at his school, at the sky for being too bright. He spat on the ground and kicked at a root. Mama Beezy saw him. She walked slowly up and said, "Careful, child." Cole scoffed. "It's just a tree." Mama Beezy sat beside him. "So was your great-grandfather." Cole frowned. "What?" She tapped the root with her cane. "Tunde, the man you read about. He's your mother's grandfather." Cole blinked. "He walked into this tree with pride and came out with purpose." Cole looked at the root. He stepped back. He didn't speak, but his silence was a beginning. The wood talks back. Tunde continued to carve. His hands were slower now but more precise. Each piece he carved was given a name. The bowl of regret. Small, round, uneven. The spoon of silence. Thin, plain, but strong. The drum of becoming. Wide, hollow, covered in goat skin, carved with proverbs. He gave them freely. He once charged for everything. Now he only accepted what people were willing to give, a yam, a poem, a promise. Sometimes people brought nothing, and he still smiled. "That's all right," he would say. "Some debts are paid with breath." The last visit to the tree. One cool evening, when the stars had just begun to pepper the sky, Tunde walked alone to the Irako tree. He carried no staff, no bag, only a small folded note. He knelt before the tree, placed the note at its root, and bowed deeply. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he sat down and closed his eyes. He did not return that night. In the morning, Fola found him, peaceful, leaning against the trunk, his chest still. He held no fear, only a smile. The note read, "I came with noise. I leave with quiet. If I am remembered, let it be not for my riches, but for my return." The roots and the rain. They buried him beside the listening tree. No one built a monument. Instead, the children of the school carved stories into the tree's fence. He bowed. He returned. He gave us room to speak. He listened. When the first rain came after his passing, it fell in a circle around the grave, light, steady, soft. And the Irako tree swayed once, like a nod, and then stood still. Olowo, generations later, new children were born. New pride took root, but the tree remained. And every time someone stood beneath it with a loud voice, something in the earth whispered back, not to silence them, but to invite them inward. Every storyteller knew how to end the tale. They would raise their hands slowly, eyes wide, and say, "Some trees give fruit, but this one, it gave a second chance." And then the listeners would bow their heads, just slightly, and the wind would rustle the leaves. And somewhere, deep in the wood, the tree would remember.